What's up, guys? 1-1 tonight. Unfortunately, a slight loss. We had almost two totally blown games, blown leads. Well, they were blown, but Montreal still wound up winning. The Montreal Canadiens, as I mentioned in the comments on my video of the daily breakdown, a couple of things I forgot to mention in that game. I saw a bunch of people talking about how the Islanders are going to be all pumped up to play for Roy just because he was going back to Montreal. I'm like, I don't really see that as being an angle. Like, is that really going to pump them up to play against the Montreal Canadiens? I'm not really sure about that. I mean, maybe Roy himself might be a little pumped for it, but that didn't really seem to be that much of a motivating factor to me. And the one other thing that I think was more of a factor in the game that I forgot to mention in the video was that Varlamov, he was coming back for the Islanders. He's their top goalie, and he had been out with an injury since like early January. So reverse injured player theory maybe factoring in there a little bit, maybe moving the line a little bit upward on the Islanders in general, more than maybe it should have with that star player coming back. Basically, you're a starting goalie coming back. It takes a little while for him to get back like into rhythm, and we did see that tonight. He was not good early in the game. Montreal had a 3-0 lead in the middle of the second period. But, of course, as all of my bets tend to do, apparently, especially in college basketball, but in this case in hockey, they blew the entire lead. Wound up, well, they were still carrying a 3-1 lead into the third period, and then they blew that, and then all of a sudden it was tied 3-3, and luckily Montreal was able to get the winning goal, and I think they still won in regulation, so they still did it. Still the right play as an underdog. I mean, when you have an underdog price and you're up 3-0 in the middle of the second, I mean, pretty much tells you you're on the right side there. Maybe should have gone with like a first period play or something because Montreal was better earlier in the game, of course, with Varlamov shaking off the rust and whatever. But even so, I just thought in general it was a bad spot for the Islanders and kind of a sandwich spot, as I mentioned in my video. That one still got there. Arizona State did not get there, and that was looking real good early on. They had a double-digit lead. I think I got them as like a 9.5-point underdog. I said you could wait on that one because it looked like the number was going up, and the public was probably just going to be playing Oregon if they were playing that game. And it did go up, but there were some pros that came in on Oregon, it seems, and disagreed with me. But once the market shook out on that, it was still like, I think it was like 71% of the tickets were on Oregon, but only like 60-something% of the cash. So still looked like the cash discrepancy was agreeing with me on that one when all was said and done. And I thought it was a sandwich spot, and it was looking good. Sandwich spot for Oregon because they have Arizona up next, and they were coming off that big game against Utah, like I mentioned. It was looking good early. Arizona State had the double-digit lead in the first half. It was looking good. They had the lead for the entire first half, winning outright as the pretty sizable underdog, winning into the second half. And then I don't know what happened. They went on a stretch where they allowed Oregon to go on a 15-0 run. Then they scored like a couple more points and then didn't score again for another like few minutes. There was like an 8-minute span where Arizona State only scored 5 points and they got outscored by like 20 or something during that time span. They gave up 52 points in the second half after only allowing like 28 in the first half. It was just ridiculous. They just, not only did they completely stagnate offensively in the middle of the second half, but they also just gave up a bunch of points, and it made no sense. Like, if you look at the game statistically, it wasn't like that. There wasn't like that much of a discrepancy between the two teams statistically. I mean, Oregon won the rebound battle by a bit. A lot of it was made free throws. There was a difference there, but like turnover wise, like field goal attempts wise, whatever, like that all was pretty close. Arizona State shot a bit less percentage-wise, like low 43% versus like 50%, which isn't great, but statistically it still looked like a game they probably should have come within the number as a big underdog and been close enough to cover that, but that wasn't to be. Again, like the first more than the first half of the game. The first 27 out of the 40 minutes of the game looked pretty good, and it looked like it was going to be a 2-0 night for me, possibly with an underdog money line cash, and then it wound up being like a 20-point loss in that game or something. Just completely ridiculous. Because I'm going to be gone, I'm doing the Friday daily breakdown video here. Already got the plays set for Friday. It's a shorter card on a Friday. You get a little bit more NBA, although I haven't loved the NBA Friday cards recently, but I do have one play in the NBA. You get a short college basketball card as well, and a little bit of NHL. I do have one play in each of the three for Friday, so I'll go through them. And well, I was going to say also, unfortunately, as far as tonight is concerned with the NBA, it looks like my lean on the Utah Jazz did get there, unfortunately, because I didn't want to play the number when it like shot up. It actually went down a little bit after it got up to 8. I think some bettors came back in on it and knocked it down a little bit, down to 7. But I liked the situation for the Jazz, and they did wind up covering. They were coming off, I think, an embarrassing loss or something, and the Wizards were coming off like a really tough game that they played, I think last night, even maybe. I forget what it was, but there was that. And then I also leaned to the Kings because the Warriors. I should have played the Warriors last night before I said I was going to get into Friday's games. Oh man, I just talk way too much. The Warriors, of course, are in that spot where they were going to be like going all out for their assistant coach's death in their return to the court last night, and that is what happened. They played really well. It didn't look good early on, but they found their rhythm, and they wound up blowing out the Atlanta Hawks. And the Hawks, as I pointed out, are the worst. They're like a historically bad against the spread team this year. They're the worst team in the NBA against the spread this year by far, and they continue to not cover games. So that was just crazy, but it was a huge emotional win for the Warriors. I probably should have played the Warriors just for that reason, but the market didn't look great for it. And then tonight, after you have that huge like emotional high like that, I felt that tonight was going to be a letdown, and maybe I should have played the Kings, but the game's pretty close right now in the fourth quarter with the Kings laying. They wound up actually going off a 1-point favorite after they were a 2.5-point favorite for much of the day. They wound up going off 1, with the Warriors getting 61% of the cash and 53% of the tickets. So the market indicators, cash discrepancy and the line movement look like they both went in the direction of the Warriors. So maybe I'm glad I stayed off of that. But situationally, I liked the Kings there, and they still might cover. They're winning by 3 in the fourth quarter right now as it stands right now, I think. But because the Warriors had such an emotional high, and that was last night, I believe, although they had a ton of days off before that. So their rest situation, even though it's a back-to-back, wouldn't be that bad because they had like 8 days off or something before last night's game. So that kind of mitigates the back-to-back a little bit. But when that was such an emotional high of a game, like could they really maintain that for another game the next night? I mean, it looks like they are kind of doing that. They're playing pretty well in this game. But my thought would have been that maybe they like run out of steam a little bit, run out of that emotion a little bit. And the Kings, they still have the motivation because the Warriors, I'm pretty sure, are the team that eliminated them last year, ended their season, knocked them out of the playoffs last year. And I think the Kings were the 3 seed and the Warriors were the 6, but the Warriors were the slightly better team despite the seeding, and wound up getting rid of the Kings, ousting the Kings from the playoffs. And the Kings, I believe, are 0-2 against the Warriors this year, so they still are seeking that revenge for being eliminated by the Warriors last year. So you think the Kings would have that extra motivation coming into this game too. We'll see how that pans out. But anyway, going to the Friday card where I have one play in each of the sports coming into Friday. On the Friday card here, what do we got here? We have in the short college basketball card, I'm going to take Utah Valley plus 6.5 right now. It looks like it was 7 to start out, 6.5. Ken Baum has this at 8. So I don't know. It makes me a little bit hesitant on it because Ken Baum has the number a little bit higher than where I want it to be here. And I'd rather get the 7 or 7.5 because it's kind of a key number in basketball where that's when teams stop intentionally fouling because it becomes a 3-score game at 7. So the 7 is a little bit key in basketball. But even so, this is a terrible spot for Seattle, even though I played Seattle in what I thought was going to be a letdown spot before after they I forget what it was. I think I played them, right? Or I mean faded them. Yeah, I think I faded them after they had a big game against Washington, and they still wound up winning against Louisiana Tech in the next game. So I thought they were in a fade spot coming off 2 tough games against San Francisco and Washington, and they still showed up and won against Louisiana Tech, although it was close. That's unfortunate, but last game was a huge game for Seattle. They beat Grand Canyon on their home floor, which was on the 20th. So I believe that was last Friday. No, that was Saturday night. They played Saturday, now they're playing on a Friday. But that's a huge upset, man. Nice big win on their own floor. Actually, it wasn't much of an upset spread-wise, I don't think. I think the spread was close to like a pick-em in that game, really, because Grand Canyon was on the road. But Grand Canyon's been dominating this conference, man. Grand Canyon had no losses in the conference. They had a target on their back. They've been dominating the conference. They're the best team in the WAC. Seattle, not a bad team in the WAC, though, and Seattle was able to catch them and win the game, winning by 7. It was a little bit closer in the final score. Look, I think there was some intentional fouls at the end. That was a huge win. It was coming off 3 straight road games, too, and in their last road game was kind of a tough game against Stephen F. Austin, too, who was one of the better teams in the conference as well, and they fell short and lost by 5 in that one when it was I believe that game went into overtime, so that was a close game, too. So Seattle's coming off 2 huge games, on the road, overtime game at Stephen F. Austin, and then beating Grand Canyon, which I think that resulted in a court storming. I forget. I was watching the end of that game. I think it resulted in a court storming because you take out the undefeated team that's like dominating your conference at home. That's a huge win. So that puts Seattle in a letdown spot. They got Utah Valley coming in. Utah Valley, they have not been playing well this year, although they did actually beat Seattle this year early in the season. They actually played an early season conference game at Utah Valley. Utah Valley was able to win the game by 6, but even so, I don't know if Seattle's going to – I think revenge in this case is a little bit overrated because even though Seattle did lose to Utah Valley that first time, is that really going to be enough of a motivator to get them over the hump out of the fact that that they're in this huge sandwich spot here, coming off those, not only just beating Grand Canyon, but the game against Stephen F. Austin that went into overtime before that. The win over Grand Canyon was absolutely massive. And then who do they have next on February 1st? They play Grand Canyon again. So they're in a Grand Canyon sandwich, man. They're sandwiched into the Grand Canyon. They're falling into the Grand Canyon. I don't know if they'll be able to climb out, man. I don't know if they got mules that'll be able to get them out of there, get them out of this Grand Canyon sandwich. I'm not sure, but I like Utah Valley here. Seattle. Yeah, the Grand Canyon sandwich is just, it sounds awesome. It's just an awful, awful spot. Coming off such a huge win there at home, court storming. They're staying at home, kind of like basking in that win, really, and they know they have Grand Canyon again up next. Huge game again up against Grand Canyon, who's still leading the conference. And Utah Valley is tied with them in the conference, yeah, but they're a couple games behind them overall record-wise, even though, yeah, Utah Valley did beat them that one time. Still, the Grand Canyon games are much, much bigger for Seattle. I mean, you don't necessarily have a revenge as like that much of a motivator with every team in your conference that's beaten you. I mean, that would be crazy. So some teams will get the season sweep. And we don't even need that here. We just need Utah Valley to come within the number here. And Utah Valley have been playing pretty poorly. And you actually have a situation where you have some common opponents here too, where Seattle just played at UT Rio Grande Valley and lost by 1, which was a big win for Rio Grande Valley, really. And then they played at UT Arlington, another tough game, second straight road game with Stephen F. Austin coming up on deck. Lost that game by 5. And then you look at Utah Valley. Utah Valley also played both of those teams on the road and lost both of those games worse. And they played Grand Canyon on the road and lost as well. So all these common opponents, that's going to put people on Seattle, man. People are going to see Seattle did better against all 3 of these opponents. Seattle beat Grand Canyon, and Grand Canyon beat Utah Valley pretty easily. So, of course, Seattle's the easy side to pick here, right? Even though, of course, we know the line's telling you Seattle is indeed the better team, but they're being favored by a decent amount of points here, and it is a bad spot for Seattle, like I said. So Utah Valley went into UT Arlington and lost by 14, whereas the game was much closer for Seattle. Utah Valley went into UT Rio Grande and lost that game by 8. Seattle played them closer on the road as well. And then Utah Valley Utah Valley lost to Grand Canyon, like I said, who Seattle just beat. And then, although that was at home for Seattle, it was on the road for Utah Valley, even so. And then Utah Valley came home for 1 game at home before they had to go back out on the road again, which is pretty weird to have that one isolated home game like that with 3 road games before that and 2 road games after it. Kind of weird. You don't see that very much in college basketball, but they were able to win that game. It was against Utah Tech, who's one of the lower teams in the conference. I like the fact that Utah Valley got that win against Utah Tech because it was against a team that's not very good, and it broke a 3-game losing streak for them. So I think that kind of gives you momentum. So you get that win at home, and that gives you momentum going back out on the road there. So I like that aspect of it. And that was that also a Saturday game? I think it might have been. Yeah, it was. So that gives you some like positive momentum coming off of that, whereas Seattle's in like a sandwich spot for sure, in a letdown spot off of the huge win over Grand Canyon. Utah Valley, as I've been saying, the win over Utah Tech just might serve as like a stepping stone. Like that breaks their losing momentum that they had on the road. They had a bad road trip. Okay, they came back home, won a game. Now you have that momentum you get to carry out on the road with you to Seattle. Seattle in the bad spot as well. So I think it's a bad spot for Seattle and a positive spot for Utah Valley. So I'm on Utah Valley plus 6.5. I don't know if the number's going to get back into the 7 range or not, but I like Utah Valley in that one. Plus the points. Let's do it. I mean, I think the situation calls for it, even though the number's a little bit off from where KenPom has it. Over to the NBA. I'm going to make one play here in the NBA, and that is going to be fading the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers are not in a good spot, man. I think this is a sandwich spot. And what do we have for the market on this? We got the Clippers opened, looks like 8.5, and they're already down to 7.5. I believe I took the Toronto Raptors at +8. I think there are still 8s out there. So as long as it's the 7.5 or above, and I think it doesn't matter as much. I think that's fine to get a number in that range. The power ratings that I look at kind of have this number in like the 6 range instead. So the number's a bit high. Of course, it's going to be because it's the LA Clippers. They've won 3 games in a row, 6 of the last 7. They've won 11 of the last 13 games, something like that. They've been really crushing it since they kind of got that, like, they were able to get used to having James Harden there. They've been winning a lot of games. Nobody's going to want to step in front of the Clippers, right? And what did they do in their last game? Well, they beat the Los Angeles Lakers, their in-city rival, and they lost to the Lakers the prior game that they played against them. So that's a big game for them, man. A big win, getting a little bit of revenge there as well against the Lakers. Now with 2 days off, I think the 2 days off, even though usually when a team wins their last home game and then they get to take that out on the road, I tend to think that's positive, like what I just said with Utah Valley there. But in this case, I don't think it is, because they had won all 3 of their home games in that homestand, and then they had 2 days off after the Lakers game, and it was the Lakers, which is just a big win in general when you're the Clippers. It's your cross-city rival there. And I think they play in the same arena too, don't they? I forget. I think they do. They both play at the Staples Center. I forget. But like Clippers coming off that, I think the extra rest might actually hurt their momentum, because they won all 3 of those games. And the first one was a win over Oklahoma City too, which was a big win. And the game before that was their final road game of a 2-game road trip where they barely lost to Minnesota. So they were playing some pretty tough games. Now they have a couple of days off. They're kind of riding that high off of beating their rival, the Lakers. And they have to go all the way up to Canada now. So a bit of travel there, even though they have that extra day off. It might hurt their momentum. They have to go up into Canada, playing a Toronto team that they did just beat in LA on January 10th, although Toronto actually covered as an 11.5-point underdog. Which number is a bit high there, but Clippers wound up winning the game by 6, and it was actually kind of a close game. So I don't know if the Clippers are going to remember that and actually be motivated for this. I don't think they're going to totally focus on Toronto because they did still win that game, and this is a situation where in that game, actually, they were riding high too, because they had just blown out Phoenix the game before that. And the game before the Phoenix game, they lost to the Lakers. Now in this spot, they just played the Lakers. They have to go on the road. Oh, and who do they play the very next night on Saturday? They play the Boston Celtics on the road. So I think this is a bad spot for the Clippers, man. I think they're going to overlook the Toronto Raptors, even though the Raptors played them well not too long ago. When you have this sandwiched in between your cross-city rival, the LA Lakers, who you just beat, and then you have Boston coming up after this, even though you did just blow out Boston on your home, Boston blew them out. What am I saying? So that's going to have them probably looking ahead to Boston even more, because actually, I should know as a Celtic fan, Celtics don't usually get blown out like that. Their losses tend to be pretty close. The Celtics went into the LA Clippers home and destroyed them, beat them 145-108. So I think the Clippers might be focused on that Boston game, man. They might want a little bit of revenge there. So this Toronto game, Toronto sucks, and it's just sandwiched in there between the Lakers and Boston here, and then Cleveland up after that, which is maybe a bigger game as well, because Toronto's just the bad team in this stretch of like games that mean more to the Clippers, and most of them against better teams, bigger teams than what Toronto is. and they just beat Toronto, even though it was fairly close. So I think they could overlook Toronto. I like taking Toronto in this spot. And as far as Toronto's side is concerned, so I'm on Toronto +8. Toronto, they got to turn something around, man. They've lost 3 games in a row, and they've lost 7 of the last 8. So nobody's going to want to play Toronto here, man. The Clippers have been hot and winning all these recent games. Toronto's been losing most of these recent games, including losing to the Clippers. Toronto's lost to some good teams in that stretch, though. I mean, they lost to the Lakers, they lost to the Lakers by 1, which was a pretty close game, and a lot of road games in this some of that stretch too. They lost at the Clippers and then at Utah, which is usually a tough spot. Lost fairly close to Boston, played pretty well in that one. They beat Miami, then they lost to Chicago, which is probably the worst loss they have. Maybe the Memphis one is the worst one, which was their most recent game. And they lost to the Knicks. The Knicks play pretty good defense, aren't a bad team. So I don't know. Toronto's recent stretch hasn't really been against like the easiest teams necessarily. But now they have extra days off. They have more days off than LA does. They have 3 days off, and they're just staying at home. And I think those days off are going to help kill their losing momentum because they've lost the last 3 games now. Now they have 3 days off to kind of just stop that momentum. They don't really have any bigger teams up next. They have the Clippers coming into their house, man. It's James Harden. It's the star lineup the Clippers have here coming into their house. I think Toronto's going to be focused. I mean, they've lost all these games in a row recently, a bunch of recent games, have extra days off to regather themselves, refocus for this. So for all those reasons, I like it. I like Toronto, the Raptors +8. We'll do that. And then over in the NHL, the last game on the board I wound up actually kind of liking, and that is to play the Seattle Kraken. I'm back on the Kraken again, but laying a little bit of a price. They're up from -145 to -146. I think I laid 140 on this. What was it? Where is it? I don't even see it on this list here. 142, I guess. Yeah. So I don't know. The price doesn't vary that much. It looks like in the market place right now, but I'm laying a little bit of juice on this one, little bit of a price, but the Kraken, I think the line's telling you they're actually the slightly better team here, even though they have the worst record. So the line looks a little bit suspicious. Like, why are the Kraken favored against St. Louis when St. Louis has the better record? Well, I think it's because Seattle is actually the better team, and St. Louis has looked good recently. They're on a 3-game win streak with 2 of those games on the road, but now they're playing a 3rd game in 4 days, all on the road, coming into Seattle, and they have 1 day off, but they're coming off of an overtime win over Vancouver, which is a huge win, man. Vancouver, I think, might have the best record in the West now, one of the best records at least, and that was off of a pretty tough game against Calgary, which they also won. So they played those games on back-to-back nights. On the back-to-back, they were able to go into Vancouver and win that game in overtime. And now they're having to go to Seattle before they come back home and play LA, the Kings, 2 days later. And the Kings have a better record. Even though the Kings have been really struggling recently, the Kings still have a better record than Seattle does as well. So this might set up a little bit of a look ahead too, as well as the fact that it's a letdown. So it looks a little sandwichy here, but it's certainly at the very least a letdown coming off a real big, tough overtime win over Vancouver. I'm not sure St. Louis is going to really have it all ready for the Seattle game. And it looks like Hofer was in net for St. Louis in that game against Vancouver. So Binnington, their starter who plays the majority of their games in net, will be back in net for this one. But I don't think either of them have really been that impressive this year, even though Binnington has been good in the past. Actually, his stats are pretty good this year. Never mind. They have pretty decent stats this year, so never mind. But I know Binnington's been pretty good in the past, so Binnington being back in there does help St. Louis a little bit, but I just think it's a bad spot for St. Louis, man. And he did play the Calgary game, but even so, I don't like it. I think they're going to be in a letdown spot coming off that big win over Vancouver, whereas Seattle's been a real streaky team, man. They had a really crazy loss streak not that long ago and then started winning. And then they wound up with a crazy win streak where they won, 9 games in a row or something like that, whatever it was. And then finally had that broken and they went on a loss streak and lost 4 in a row, but it was all games on the road. So I don't know, and pretty much all to good teams. So I don't know if you can fault them for losing at Pittsburgh, at the New York Rangers, at Edmonton. Those are three pretty tough teams. And Edmonton has been on fire. I don't know if they've lost yet, but they had like 13 or 14 wins in a row, something like that during the stretch. I don't know if Edmonton's lost since then, but yeah, the Edmonton, a very hot team to run into. Yeah, they still haven't lost since then. So they're on some massive winning streaks. That's what Seattle ran into. Then Seattle came back home. And of course, we always say the return home spots tend to not be very good, especially when it's coming home from a very long road trip, which it was. They lost to Toronto, even though Toronto's not that bad. It was a tough spot, and then they finally were able to bounce back in the second home game back after they were able to put those home distractions away, finally get a win against a lowly Chicago team, but still, I think that's good. I like that coming into this game. They only have 1 day off here. Both of these teams only have 1 day off, but Seattle's just staying at home here, and they don't really have any important games up ahead. Columbus and San Jose, who cares about those games? I think they'll be focused on St. Louis here. They just got that win against Chicago to break their losing momentum, and I like that, where they'd lost 4 straight games and then finally won a game. So now you put those losses aside. You can win. You're feeling good about yourselves. We know we can win. It gives you a little bit of confidence. It doesn't make you overconfident at all, especially because you beat Chicago, who isn't good at all, like one of the worst teams in hockey. So I think that just gives you a little bit of confidence going forward and helps give you like that stepping stone. So I like that. So I like the Seattle side in that one, minus 142 or whatever. So the Friday card is Utah Valley in college basketball plus 6.5. Well, I don't know if you'd be able to get 7 at this point. The 7 would be a lot better, I think, but still, I like the Utah Valley side. Plus 6.5, we'll call it there on that one. Toronto Raptors and NBA plus 8. And in the late game there, hockey, Seattle Kraken minus 142. That's going to do it for my Friday video. And I just put up my NFL video for conference championship weekend, where I actually am playing the side in both games, and I have a prop that I like in both games that I threw out there in that video. So, and I have leans on the totals, but I really don't feel strongly about those at all. I really do not. I like both of the sides, and I like the props though, so that I put out in that video. So go check that video out for the NFL stuff. It's going to do it for me, man. I'm toad. I don't know what I'm going to do about the Saturday packed college basketball card, because there are going to be spots that I like. I'll have to get those out to you somehow. Hopefully I'll be able to do that. I don't know if I'll do it in a little while before I sleep. I don't even know. Figure it out. Happy Friday, man. Peace.